Hello. Thank you for watching this video. The interview you're about to watch was conducted with the sole purpose of having a conversation. That's something I believe this country has lost the ability to do. It's maybe due to the rise of technology or culture in general, or whatever the case may be. But one thing is for sure, most people are listening to respond. They're not listening to understand what the other person has to say or why they believe what they're talking about. They're going for clickbaits or gotcha type moments. But in this interview, the guiding principle was to understand what Mr. Jim Riley believed in. And there's a classic philosophy, I believe, from Heidegger, where he talks about your worldview is determined based on your location in the world, the era that you lived in, or the surroundings, the environment. And what that means is someone that was born in the city of New York to a two-parent household is going to live in a different way than somebody that was born in a rural type area, maybe in Kansas or wherever. But what I have to say is there is a commonality between the two that can still happen, an objective reality, and a uniting principle. And what I found out with Mr. Jim Riley is he believes that a uniting principle is not only having a belief in God, but also the uniting principle of being an American. Now, I won't say anything more about the interview. You'll have to watch it. But this interview went in an entirely different way than I had thought. I had a list of questions and a guideline. But allowing him to speak and trying to understand more of what he believed, I let him guide the conversation. And we got into some topics that I didn't expect, but it was a lot of fun and enjoyable, and something that I really enjoyed to hear because he was passionate. And that is a lost thing that I found in this culture, is a lot of people just talk about what they have been told, rather than critically thinking through the issues that's going on in this culture. There's a lot of them. So I hope that you enjoy this interview. If you like it, please subscribe and leave a comment, and just let me know what you think and if you'd like to see more of this content. Now, without further ado, here's the interview. Mr. Jim Riley, it's a pleasure. It's an honor to meet you. I really appreciate you taking your time and allowing me to come up here and talk with you.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah, man. All right. So what originally caught my attention to you was a Facebook post that you did discussing the California politics, the election that's going on. And I originally is this Riley's Apple Farm? The place that I came up when I was like 5, and I got the opportunity to visit this as a field trip. So that's what caught my attention. I really wanted to talk with you. But before we get down the rabbit hole of politics and all the nonsense that's going on out there in the world, just explain to our viewers who you are, who Jim Riley is, and what you do.
Sure. Jim Riley, I was born in California, Pasadena, California. I'm a boomer, tail ender, 1959. Grew up in the suburbs, but my dad always had a ranch out here in nearby Yucaipa. And so we would vacation out here and come up to Oakland. And in 77 or 78, my older brother Denny bought a 12-acre apple farm and began opening that farm for U-pick harvesting, basically, where people come up and pick their own apples, Okay. And then a larger property came up for sale next to it, and we talked our dad into buying that, and we eventually amassed about 760 acres in the eastern Oakland area. So we have about 3,000 apple trees, and we were approached to do a Civil War reenactment because the farm's meadows, they look very, very much like East Coast meadows with the black oak groves in the distance. And so that evolved into a living history business for children, basically. We've seen as many as 80 or 90,000 students a year in
Wow.
recreations of the Revolutionary War and Civil War and Gold Rush. So we do a living history field trip basically for kids. So, and then we also do dinner theater, and the farm sort of evolved into primarily an entertainment and living history site. You know, we do a lot of agriculture, but it's not the biggest part of our picture anymore. So,
Really?
so, and I've always been, I have a degree in history from Stanford, and I've always loved history, and I love the 18th century in particular. So it's kind of where my first love is. So.
Wow. So you said 760 acres?
Yes.
That's insane. So I guess my question would be, what part of that is apples, and what part of it is the historical aspect that you enjoy doing?
We probably only have about 30 acres total under cultivation. You can grow a lot of apples in an acre, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's a very hilly property. There's a lot of brush, you know, a lot of manzanita and that sort of thing on the interior. But there are some very beautiful meadows that haven't been developed for farming. And we're hoping someday to have something of a rural living history resort of some sort. So
Okay.
that would be the ideal.
Yeah, I mean, when people think of California, they think of wine, they think of agriculture.
Right.
Before recent history, it was about business. You know, and way back in the day, it was about, you know, about the gold rush and things. But I guess, how did you I mean, you touched on it a little bit about your history in coming here, but what got you into apple farming specifically? Because it's known as Riley's Apple Farm, and I know, I think in recent you changed it to as Riley's Farm. At least when I was a kid, I knew of it as Riley's Apple Farm. How did you kind of get into that business?
Well, there's probably 40 or 50 members of the Riley family who live on this side of Oak Glen.
Okay.
And Riley's Apple Farm is really the original apple farm. That's my brother's place.
Okay.
And then the larger farm became Riley's Farm, very confusing, you know.
Yeah.
And then my nephew Devin leases and manages the apples at Los Rios, basically. So there's also Riley's at Los Rios. So this whole side of the Glen is all Riley family, basically, and there are different businesses. So you're talking to what's known as Riley's Farm, basically. So
Okay. Wow, that's crazy.
and the apples, basically, the apples have been cultivated up here since the 1880s, you know, and this was homesteaded by a guy named Joe Wilshire, and he was a contemporary of the Earp brothers in Colton. You know, he was a cowboy in Huntington Beach, Newport Beach, and decided to come up here and homestead in the 1870s. There were actually squatter farmers up here before the Civil War in 1855.
Can you explain what that is?
Just someone who came up and didn't homestead but just started farming, you know.
Okay.
And a prominent Redlands family was here, I believe, in 1855, you know. So that's how far the history goes back in this area, you know.
And then when did you acquire it, the Riley family?
We began acquiring it in 1986 through about 2001 or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you own it outright then?
Yes.
Still the Riley family?
Yeah.
Okay.
My younger brother and I own the large farm, but there's lots of Riley's own smaller parcels up the road here. So.
You know, 700, and you said how many acres? 760?
Yeah.
I can just picture a Yellowstone scenario about the big government trying to come down and take your farm. I mean, has anything like that happened where the government kind of pushing to do
We've been
something?
very fortunate. We haven't really had too many run-ins with the feds, and the county has been, you know, for example, during COVID, I looked at it, I said, I'm going to give this 2 weeks. If I see bodies piling up on the corner, then I'll take it seriously or whatever. But after that, we opened up and we allowed people to mask or not mask, or you know, be out in the country and come have a restaurant meal. So we were open basically during COVID. And the county was very good with us. They had hundreds of complaints from what I would call the COVID Pharisees, you know what I mean, who thought it was really a huge public health crisis. But the county pretty much just ignored them, you know, because, I mean, you know, kids running around in the open and out in the air, basically.
Right.
It turned out to be a ridiculous error on the side of caution, by public health authorities. So we were open there, but the biggest problem we have in California is that development of any sort is prohibitively expensive. It begins with studies and development fees, and to make it even worse, there's no guarantee that you'll get what you're planning to build. So you could very well, in a place like this, you could put out $2 or $3 million and not get to build anything. So it's a very backward. It's why we have homelessness. I mean, we've made it very difficult to build homes in California, and we're feeding a huge sucking class of civil servants. That are draining us dry. So
we'll definitely get into that a little bit later. But that's very true. So with COVID, I didn't know. So you stayed open during COVID. Wow. So where you're at, is this Yucaipa technically? Or
we're San Bernardino County.
So you're San Bernardino County.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So
unincorporated county. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. So then, how much does it cost for someone to come up here and visit Riley's farm?
We have everything from free. I mean, you can walk on the grounds. There's no charge. Our field trips run from anywhere from $18 to $35. We have overnight programs that are about $140.
Oh, you do overnight too?
Yeah, for field trip kids groups, And then our dinner theaters in the $65 to $70 range. We're not yet a general admission destination. So basically people during public hours can walk around, and it's got beautiful trails and lots of orchards to see, But if they want to join a program, then families can join a field trip if they want to. So.
Okay. And then people can come up, and you talked about you pick, was that correct?
Right.
Mm-hmm. And that essentially means that people can come up and pick their own apples?
Right. They pick their own apples, pears, pumpkins, strawberries. This year we're going to add tomatoes. We have Indian corn. We have, what else do we have? We have, a lot of raspberries and blackberries, that sort of thing. So,
Really?
Yeah.
That's crazy. I didn't know any of this when because when I was a kid, I was 5. You don't really remember a whole lot. Okay, so people can come up and have their own experience and pick whatever they want, and they can just take it home from there, or do they have to?
Yeah, they just pay by the pound, and
pay by the pound.
Okay. There's in the fall. There's 2 different food facilities. This restaurant and our packing shed, our 1880s packing shed, so they can get a meal, and sometimes they stay for like Sleepy Hollow or dinner theater show or something like that. So
I noticed. We look out and we see a bunch of kids running around. There's a field trip that's going on right now. So how much of what you do is based on the field trip experience versus just outside the public, just coming in and?
We're probably about 50% field trips, and 10 or 15% agriculture. The rest of it's dinner theater. So we're primarily. That's why people get confused about the cultural message. Is that they hear farm, and they think, that you can just go up there and buy bulk fruit or whatever, But it's basically, it's an open to the public kind of cultural destination. So.
Yeah. Wow, that's. I hear the bells going on right now. So, I noticed on the website, on Riley's Farm website, you talk about things like the Revolutionary War adventure, the Civil War adventure, Gold Rush adventure, a lot of adventures going on. Right. What are those experiences like, and how did you get into, allowing these experiences to happen at your farm?
It was kind of serendipitous. We were doing 18th century dinner theater here in this building, and 2 5th grade moms came up and asked us if we would do a field trip for kids, And I didn't think it would work, because when I was a kid, we would just go to the museum or the dairy or, bakery or whatever. And our program, basically, the kids witness a skirmish between redcoats and Minutemen. They hear black powder. Then they go through 6 15-minute workshops where we dramatize the Stamp Act and the Admiralty Courts and all of the things, all of the issues that led to the Revolutionary War. And then they take a soldier's ration lunch, and they participate in a mock battle at the end of the day. So it's very interactive, and it's, you know, we try to stay in character, and all characters use the language of the period, and we invite the kids. We actually give them parts to play at the various stations, you know. So it's very immersive, living history education, you know. So
wow. Yeah, I know when I was in school, the most I learned was when I was taking part in it. You know, if I'm reading, you know, Shakespeare and the kids are assigned a part, they understand more. There's definitely some scientific facts that go into that. And when they come up here, they can take part in these adventures. That's amazing.
Right. And a lot of what people don't understand is that even if you watch a movie with some historical flaws, like, you know, something like Braveheart or whatever, it gets you interested in Scottish history. So obviously we can't recreate with total accuracy, you know, history, but when you see the pageantry of it, the flags, the muskets, the different costumes, the different language, it introduces children to history in a very fun, sort of colorful way, you know.
Yeah.
And that's the way in some ways they used to teach, because in New England they would have recreations of the battles decades after they had taken place, you know.
Wow.
So it's a fairly old tradition. It's just it fell out of favor for several decades in the 20th century, you know. So
yeah. So why do you think that is exactly?
You know, it's just the mass production of education, public education, where it became a textbook, answers at the end of the chapter. I remember in elementary school, we all sang God Bless America, My Country 'Tis of Thee, Battle Hymn of the Republic. They don't sing any of that anymore. A lot of teachers I talk to say it's so focused on testing, they don't have time to be showmen, you know what I mean? And sometimes when you're a teacher, you have to be a showman, you know what I mean? So you have to tell a joke or tell a story, or, you know. And 19th century education for American kids was very hero-driven. So, like, for example, in New Hampshire, there's a great old 1905 textbook I have, where little boys are told basically the heroes of New Hampshire, John Stark, you know, Sullivan, and so and they're told like stories, basically, you know. So I think we just lost a lot of our romance, you know, about the period, you know. So
yeah. So I mean, you're obviously the expert in this type of history. You know, you said you went to Stanford, if I'm correct, for history, right?
Right.
So when you're doing these reenactments and the historical pieces for the children, how far we've come in culture now, where a lot of the history is trying to be rewritten. Have you noticed any pushback from schools or various? Yeah,
when I got into this in the early 90s, I guess it was, what I noticed was that left, right, or center, most Americans had affection for, you know, the image of the Minuteman, the red coat, the Pilgrims, you know. Even there was sort of a détente in the 90s when Ken Burns did his big documentary on the Civil War, and there was an affection for even the Confederacy, and I mean, in fact, back in those days, more of the reenactors wanted to reenact the Confederacy because it has something to do with the rebel American spirit. You know, it's like it was not an emphasis on slavery at that point. It was just basically the states' rights issues, whatever. And it was a war about slavery, but ever since, you know, things like the 1619 Project and the critical race theory stuff got introduced in the curriculum, it became all about oppressor and oppressed. You know, that every story in American history was told, you know, in that matrix. You know, that if you're a Christian, you were an oppressor. If you're a pagan, you were the oppressed, or whatever. If you know, if you're a slave owner and slave, male and female. And the problem with that is that most people you know, if you take an inventory of anybody you know, they're a mix of good and bad traits. You know, they have a good part of their history and a bad part of their history. You know, and Americans have always been self-critical, and that's a really good thing. I mean, that's one of the reasons our prosperity is what it is. But you can't be self-hating. You know, you can't turn to a whole group of kids and say, "We're going to tell you about all the awful things that took place in American history," and ignore, you know, the Bill of Rights, you know, the Constitution, the Transcontinental Railway, franchise for women, all the things that represent truly dramatic strides in world history. You know, I mean, I always tell a story about this. As a colonial newspaper, I have to dig up the date one of these days, but they were telling the story of a Czechoslovakian count in Europe, you know, who was riding through his fields and he saw a very attractive, like 19-year-old woman. He just took her, you know, like his possession, basically, you know.
Wow.
And so Americans, particularly of the English tradition, they would look at that horribly oppressive aristocracy and say, isn't it, it's a God-given gift that we have representative government here and that we have unalienable rights, you know. So to not tell that story to kids is a crime. I have no use for critical race theory and all this nonsense. It's for losers, you know. So
that's a great way of putting it.
Yeah.
I mean, plain and simple, it's definitely, you know, it's true. You don't hear that side all that often in culture anymore. It's, you know, at least for 10, 12 years, it was forced the other way. So, you know, in terms of forcing that race theory onto students, but, you know, at least for this group that's out here, I mean, so you're saying that some teachers or school officials have pushed back on.
Well, we get the same teachers. We get a lot of public school who can't stand the curriculum they've been assigned, you know, and so we tend to get the rational types or whatever. In the old days, we got a few, you know, far left schools, but it was just like I say, the pageantry and the fun of it, that, you know, and we don't talk about modern political issues in the living history field trips.
Right.
So. But there's every once in a while, I can remember having African American mom lamenting that we didn't show the evils of slavery, and I said, well, you know, do you really want me to do a slave auction, you know, for fourth graders or whatever? I mean, put naked human beings up on a block, and, you know, I mean, Williamsburg tried to do something like that, and it was too raw, you know. It was like you can talk about those things, you can. And I'm certainly not saying you whitewash all of American history, but children need to know there's something worth living for. You know, I mean, if you go on this LA mayor race or whatever, highlighting all these homeless encampments or whatever, that's a whole generation raised with no meaning. You know, nothing to live for. You know, except a crack pipe. You know what I mean? And so. One of the things we say at the end of the tour is that if you don't remember anything about today, we want you to know that there were men who loved all of you enough to die for you.
That's a great message to leave a student. Yeah, that's
they don't hear it. They don't hear it anywhere. You know, I mean, I think we're getting a little bit of resurgence of that under Trump, but there's a major swath of self-hatred in America right now, and I look around and I think, you know, even this podcast, you know, 20 years ago, it'd have been harder to do, you know, because the equipment would be more expensive and heavier, you know, everything. I mean, if you told me when I was a little kid that I could read almost every book in the world on a device this big, you know, instantly, you know. Life gets better, you know. And I always, my impulse is, don't F this up, you know, you guys, don't mess this up.
Right.
Because I guarantee you, some of the people that say animate Native Americans for Disney or Pixar or DreamWorks or whatever, they wouldn't last 5 minutes in Comanche, Kansas,
Yeah.
They'd have their nose cut off and they'd be tortured to death. It was not.
Right.
It's not Pocahontas. You know what I mean? And
right.
At some point, I'm not just slamming Native Americans there. I'm saying that
Right.
There was a huge increase in human rights and prosperity by the westward march, basically, by Manifest Destiny. And so it's ridiculous not to celebrate that.
Yeah, no, it's very true. In your history of running this farm and bringing these students here and having these amazing experiences for the country that we live in, we're fortunate to be in. You said in '86 you acquired this, so you've gone through at least a few governors. Have you noticed a difference in running your farm based on big government of the state?
Our biggest issues, like I say, have been planning, land use kinds of issues.
Okay.
What you can actually do with land in California, which is very restricted. But in terms of weighing in specifically on issues, I remember after the El Dorado fire, Gavin Newsom wanted to use our farm as a location for discussing fire management, and climate change. And I said, no, I'm not going to let that bastard step onto the farm. I mean, because he's going to use it as a pretext to talk about climate change when he hasn't done any of the things he could have done to, eliminate fire damage, fire danger. So,
wow.
So I wouldn't get along, I don't think, with most Democratic governors, but hopefully we're small enough that,
But he still thought of your farm to host that.
Yeah,
event?
It was just like a glad handing thing, but I just said no. I don't want to be any part of that, But they get a little bit. There's employment law lately that is getting very oppressive for not just farms but for any employer. I mean, it's very intimidating what some of these vulture lawyers can do to small business, basically. So, and we're very fair with our employees. We make sure they get breaks. We feed them. We take care of our people very well. But that's, I think, a potential issue on the horizon. So
wow.
For us, yeah.
Yeah.
California law is very much, I think, has a redistributive sort of impulse. It uses law to penalize employers. And I keep telling people, look, if you want a job, I mean, the DMV is not going to be able to employ everyone in California. So I think what Newsom has done to hurt the California economy is pretty substantial. But it is kind of a measure of our strength, is that even an incompetent like Newsom is having trouble killing the economy. If that sounds, with Silicon Valley and even the agricultural innovation that goes on in California, they have a new method of growing apples called intensive growth, where they grow them just like grapes, basically, very small, and they can grow something like 1,500 bushels of apple on 1 acre.
Really?
So there's a lot of agricultural innovation in California too, but anytime something works, it's kind of like the film industry. Once that began producing a regular stream of revenue, then all the civil servants and the unions glom onto it, and they suck like parasites sometimes. And so we were told in one production, if we did it conventionally, we had to have a $28,000 per episode line item just for the Teamsters. even if you didn't use Teamsters.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we've had commercial shoots here where the dolly operator's here, and I said, so when's the dolly shot? He said, oh, we're not going to have any dolly shots in this whole production, but the union demands that I be here, being paid, So there are very anti-efficient union regulations that are, they restrict the economy, make things expensive, so.
Yeah, there's this lack of common sense that I find in all of these things. The more education I get, the more I'm seeing that. And then I guess with the growth of that government, I guess would just lead to, with the heavy restriction of California state standards in terms of public education, that's where I'm wondering if that has tipped over into what they do here.
Well, we had as part of our First Amendment lawsuit, we had a district that didn't want to come because I had made personal political observations about Stormy Daniels, David Hogg, and Louis Farrakhan. And so you get called the typical range of insults, hate monger, racist, whatever. And so I said, look, that doesn't take place in the tour. So there was a negotiation for their district to come back, and they wanted me to put cross-dressing prospectors in the tour for fourth graders,
No way, really?
Yeah. They wanted me to have a section of the tour that dealt with alternative sexuality, and I said, this is for fourth graders, that creeps me out. I will not do that, And so they eventually relented and came back anyway, or whatever. But it's I don't understand, sexualizing children or making that as prominent a part of the curriculum as it seems to be these days. It's and we're seeing a huge explosion in homeschool groups, charter schools, magnet schools, private church schools. A lot of parents who care about their kids are just pulling them out of public school. So
and they come up here too.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, as crazy as that sounds, it's believable in the state. I think at this point, for those kinds of things, those stories that you told me have happened. That's wow. So I think now we've transitioned into the political aspect of this. What originally caught my attention were your posts, which weren't bad by any means. It was just, your views, and I was shocked to, Riley's Apple Farm is saying these things, there's a old thought in philosophy, I believe it was from Heidegger, that talked about your worldview is dictated to you by where you grew up in the world, by wherever you're at. That's your worldview is then forced upon you, and I think there's some truth to that in terms of if someone grew up in rural Kansas versus someone that grew up in New York City, their worldview would be different just in terms of their location and their environment. But where my view is that unless there's this objective reality, such as your objective morality, with God and things like that. So that's why I feel that it's interesting to understand why people believe what they believe and find out where they came from, because my view growing up in a small town in Southern California is going to be different than someone that grew up on a farm having a business and those kinds of things. I think those worldviews would be slightly different in terms of just what they have to deal with and what they see. But I think that unless you have objective belief on the world, there's going to be a connection on the two.
There can be incredible variance, on particular issues, as long as a society has something axiomatic. Like that. Thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not covet. The principles that form the old common sense. You could have hardworking union families and small business families or whatever. Yeah. But if they share a common moral reference, a source of immutable truth, then the society can operate. But if every conversation is my truth versus your truth, then you're going to have chaos at some point, and that's I think what we're seeing, you know.
Yeah.
And in terms of being an apple farm and discussing some of those issues, I always say, well, you know, we're like Ben and Jerry's for smart people. You know, it's like, you know, it's
That's great. Yeah.
They have no problem. If I had pride flags all over here and little invitations, little posters to talk about climate change or whatever, no one would have any problem or whatever, you know. But if you push back on any of those realities, you know, you know, say, no, we're going to have little boys on this side, little girls on this side, and you're going to learn how to dance, okay?
Yeah.
And you're going to learn how to dance by gender, basically, you know. Mm-hmm. There are people who regard that as homophobic, transphobic, or whatever, and I think, well, you know, I don't care. You know, I mean, I want there to be a place where there's a sanctuary from that nonsense, you know.
Yeah.
Because that's basically taking all that common axiomatic, you know, immutable truth and just throwing it out the window and saying there's nothing you can count on anymore, you know.
Yeah.
And America used to have kind of a civic morality where when I was a little boy going to Dodger Stadium, I look around, there were Mexicans, Catholics, Baptists, Mormons, you know, blacks, all getting teary-eyed when they sang the national anthem, basically, you know. And they had a common national reference, you know. And the people who hate America, they want that done, you know, they want that destroyed, you know.
Yeah.
So I've always felt that it was important, at least in our messaging out there about us, not necessarily in the programs, but out there, that we stood for the celebration of American, you know, values. So
Yeah.
that's where that comes from. So
Yeah. No, and that's amazing. I think that the beauty that's within America is being overshadowed by political jargon that's being forced upon by higher government or just the person that's in control of the classroom or anything else. It's always coming from a source of power that's being forced. And I think that's where people, the skill of free thinking and the skill of thinking objectively, I think, is being lost in this culture. So, you know, when you're talking about being at Dodger Stadium and seeing all these different, you know, lives, they're all seeing the same thing, which is that beauty that gives them the ability to live freely in this country. And I think that's something that it's kind of getting lost. But I think it's, you know, like you said, I think in recent history, I think it's kind of coming back. You know.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I think Daniel Moynihan talked about this years ago. Is that before LBJ, the black family was making huge strides. Basically, you know, they had, you know, a growing professional class: black lawyers, black doctors, black small businesses, whatever, you know. And then LBJ came in and effectively put a lot of them back on the plantation, the federal plantation, by just saying, you know, you're going to get aid to family with children, you're going to get welfare, you get more money if you divorce your husband than if you stay with your husband, you know.
Yeah.
It just destroyed, you know, the black family, you know. So it's and I think it's the basic two realities: if you have God or if you don't have God. If you don't have God, then what you end up worshiping is the state. The state is your toolbox for making society more just or whatever. But the problem with that is that you don't really have any more measuring stick, you know. You don't really have any common agreement about what's good and what's evil, you know.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you can't say things like, and the sociologists, you know, basically confirm this over and over again. You're going to be better off if your mom and dad stay married, if you get your education, if you do all these nuts and bolts things.
Yeah.
You know? But if you're mythologizing single motherhood, you know, if you're making that somehow this huge victory or whatever, you know, then you're going to have a lot of kids who never had a dad in the home, and the crime's going to go crazy, you know.
Yeah.
So I get tired of it. I mean, there's a current debate now. I just love this Pratt guy that's running for mayor, because he's just saying, you know, we go on a Harbor Freeway And it's not about homelessness. It's 97% of those people are on super meth or crack or fentanyl. You know what I mean? They'll kill you. You know what I mean? You know?
Yeah.
So they've got to be put behind a chain link fence somewhere and dry out. You know, and and you just can't. I mean, you're not. He featured a sort of a DEI contractor who had, for $16 million, had created 64 beds. Okay.
Yeah.
$250,000 per bed. Okay. I mean,
Wow.
the incentive to keep homelessness there is good. People making money off of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, anyway,
So then I guess, that would lead to, with the California election, what originally caught my attention to you. What are your thoughts on this governor's election?
I've been very frank about this. I've never trusted Steve Hilton. You know, I mean, if it were Steve and Chad and we had a Republican versus any Democrat, I would vote for the Republican. But I think that I think Steve has only recently come to any kind of appreciation of how much social values affect economic ones. So that, for example, a lot of school districts now are lamenting something that's happening, which is less and less kids are coming into the system. Okay,
Right.
So we've got to begin looking as a society at how on-demand abortion has been, both chemical and surgical, And Steve Hilton has no soul on that one, He still supports pretty much abortion on demand, within certain restraints. I mean, he's never retracted that. And he has the gall to run around saying he's pro-life by, extraditing out-of-state abortion criminals, and encouraging adoption. I said, no, that's not pro-life, Steve.
Right.
That's pretending. And I would always talk to politicians about this, is if you go into a house that's on fire and you find a room where there's 12 people,
Yeah.
and you know the way to get out, okay? You don't take a poll, on what to do, You lead people, I mean? And a lot of politicians, you can almost tell the ones who are sniffing the temperature of the room, and coming up with their decisions based on what you have to go and do is say, no, if you supported abortion, you're wrong, We're killing ourselves, We're killing our economy. We're killing all of our institutions. Social Security will not work if we're not having more children.
Right.
You've got to change your mind on this, and you've got to be willing to accept leadership. I think that's one of the things about Trump that it's like fingernails on the chalkboard with some people. They just can't stand dad. They don't want dad home. They don't want any dad. Toxic masculinity leadership or whatever, but I don't think anything gets done. I mean, I don't think if Karen Bass can't fill a reservoir, in fire season, how do we expect her to solve any other problem? I mean, I don't know about you, but it's a funny story. We got off the freeway at Cabazon, and the service streets were just packed. I mean, once you got off the freeway, you were not going to get on the freeway for another 45 minutes at least, And it was because no one had put any traffic cops directing any of the intersections, basically, They had just, they had cut off an entrance and then not done anything about it. And I got thinking, my dad's generation would have been a little bit more on the ball about this, you know what I mean? And I kept thinking, where have all the grown-ups gone, People have been so indulged by their parents and their institutions, that they're not considering the fault tolerance of their systems, and then things just go crazy after a while.
The ability to critically think.
Yeah. And even just consequence. For example, I mean, right now, the Soros level DA type stuff where someone can push a commuter into a metro rail train, kill them. Okay?
Yeah.
And
I saw that. Yeah.
in my mind, I think there should be a public execution within about 2 months, basically. We went up to about 1920, the time between a capital crime and execution averaged about 3 months.
Yeah.
Now it's 22 years. So if you take all these kids out here who never see any consequence, they never get expelled from school, they never get punished for pretty hardcore violence, you know.
Yeah.
They're going to think the world is made for them. They can do anything they want, and so sorry to be depressing, but that, you know.
Hey, that's the world of politics in this country, and it's. I think there's a classic view. I think it was Japan or something. It was talking about the idea of public shaming, so public punishment, when the criminal is having to face their society and getting that public shame. It does more than behind closed doors, because instead of behind closed doors having the one-on-one type of punishment, they're now having their whole society.
All right.
You know, so
it's a fascinating topic. It's called the execution sermon. In the 18th century, they would typically, and this tells you something, they didn't have to do that many executions, but when they did an execution, a pastor would get up there and give a message to the whole crowd, and usually the penitent criminal who was about to die would be encouraged to warn young people about the fate of his life, you know, and I don't think that sounds barbaric at all. I think that's, you know, I really think that people, the Bible talks about there being, the land is polluted with blood that hasn't been, you know, avenged, basically. So I think if people don't think they're safe, you know, they start to lose hope, you know.
Yeah, well, and there are biblical teachings that talk about corporal punishment or you know, death penalty. That is defended. You know, they talk about the eye for an eye. That was for judges and, you know, things like that.
Jesus didn't loose the good thief from the cross. You know, he got to go to paradise, but he didn't exempt him from his earthly, you know, obligations under the judicial system. And there's a lot of bad theology out there these days. That's another big part of our problem.
Yeah, I think culture has morphed the Bible into justifying their daily living. You know. Yeah. You know, they want to say the Bible's been rewritten. It's like, well, that's a classic fallacy where they, you know, if that's the case, then at what point was it authentic? Because Bible scholars have devoted their whole lives into proving the authenticity of the Bible, you know, and that's definitely something that, you know, I go to a Christian college, you know, at CBU, so it, you know, we've had to study this kind of stuff and ethics and things, and, you know, that's a crazy
It's
thing.
a fascinating question. I've never understood someone who had to have the label of, say, a Protestant Christian denomination, whatever, and completely unmoored themselves, you know, from the Bible, basically. You know, that they take what they want.
Right.
And it's like, I thought, why not just make a social club? You know, I mean, you know, if that's, I mean, and I mean, biblical literacy in the 18th century was profound, and one of the things I've just in my own research found out is that I think the Christianity of the 18th century was a lot more vibrant, manly, celebratory. In other words, when they built a church, the first thing they did was put a barrel of rum on the floor of the church, you know, and that was like the juice that got the whole party going, you know. Yeah. And they had lots of children. They danced, you know. They're into music or whatever, and they were fighters too. I mean, but the biggest thing I think is that they looked at that whole continent and they had a very kind of post-millennial view, you know, that we're going to take Christ to a savage world and share the good news with people who are living under horrible conditions. You know what I mean? And so it wasn't waiting all the time for the end. Basically, you know, like it's all going to burn. You know what I mean? Yeah. I love Chuck Smith, but he always did this sermon about it's all going to burn. It's all going to burn. I think, Chuck, what does that tell a young Christian kid in the audience? You know? Right. Should I be a doctor? It's all going to burn. You know. should I,
There's no glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the 18th century was a lot more optimistic about the march of Christ through history. And I think a lot of our churches, with some notable exceptions, are suffering from that fatalism, because I guarantee if every pastor in a town said, look, there's an abomination going on in the public library, they've hired some pervert to dress up as a woman and read to kids,
Yeah.
If that consensus was shared widely in the church, none of that stuff we wouldn't be facing any of that stuff. Mm-hmm. It would, because they would be demanding that Christ's dominion prevail in the public square, So it's my big theme last 2 decades has been our problem is theology. So
I think that's true. I think there's also this what I call denominational warfare, where, I'm a Baptist, so you're a Pentecostal, you're a, I think that's
majoring in the minors.
Exactly. Yeah, it's self-inflicting. It doesn't solve anything. You either believe the whole Bible or none of it. That's my own belief. If you cherry pick, then if there's one thing wrong, I believe that's God's word. Well, if you believe that one thing's wrong in there, then definitionally you believe that God lied at that point. Because if you're saying that's God's word, but one thing's wrong, well, God's never wrong. So that's where I go with it. And they say, it was written by man. Okay, well, this is also God's word. A good amount of it was Jesus' word, and then the prophets, and with it infuriates me when I'm seeing that, because it's like you said, it's all going to burn, it's all going to burn, it's all going to burn. What does that do to the listener at that point? It doesn't give them any hope to continue. What's the point at this point? Because then that leads to hedonism. Because if I'm going to burn anyway, then what?
It's always been a balancing act. You enjoy the day, you go back to Jesus, but while you're in the vineyard, you work the vineyard. You want to be found working the vineyard when He returns. And I think that second part of the message has really been shortchanged, because really it's much easier to preach a message that's just insular spiritual solace,
Right.
When you start saying we're going to tend the vineyard, then you get into all kinds of political raging debates about what does constitute justice, Christian justice, and a lot of pastors just don't want to supervise that process. They don't want to be leaders, but if somebody's killing babies down the street, or someone's sexualizing children at the public school library, at some point pastors have to understand that the hireling is the one that doesn't care about the sheep. The pastor who cares about the sheep is the one who goes and kills wolves. So it's been I think it's been a problem for America for the last probably century, because they just stepped out of the public square. And look who walked into it.
Well, I guess I would ask, because going on your website, there are links to all these different things. Some of which are what you can do here at the farm, and then some of them are, I think it's your own thoughts and your viewpoints and things. So one of the ones, it had a link, it was on Christian nationalism. So I guess I would ask, can you define what that is, and are you one?
The problem is that the definition is definitely the problem with Christian nationalism, because there are some odious, awful groups who embrace it. There's some identity types and some racists who embrace some of that, but I think the majority are the sort of Doug Wilson, Jeff Durbin, even Jack Hibbs types, who basically preach that Jesus is Lord of more than just your salvation. He's Lord of your politics, your finance, your art, everything, basically. So that will translate. And I do it. My definition is very general. It's like a Christian nationalist nation. The legislators would be separate, from theocratic rulers. There would be no theocracy, but the legislators would be heavily influenced by what the Bible had to say about public policy, so that, you know, you could have different Christian nationalist nations who come to different conclusions, but they're all looking to the same book to make those decisions, you know.
Okay.
And it would be a very gradual process, you know, probably 300 or 400 years before that kind of Reformation was really felt. I mean, because that's what happened with the Reformation. It was 200 years before some of those ideas began identifying themselves in political policy, you know. So, but that, I know it scares, it scares a lot of believers I agree with, you know, because I wouldn't want to be ruled, you know, by, I don't know, Franklin Graham, you know. I like Franklin Graham, you know, but I wouldn't want to be ruled by a body of Baptist pastors or whatever. But I would want them to shepherd men who see policy making as their life's work, you know, and be influenced heavily by that. We've fallen so radically from that standard that people don't. They're alarmed by what it would take to get back to it. For example, we all know that divorce is probably too easy in our culture. Basically, we make it no fault, you know.
Oh yeah.
So kids get stranded, you know, shared back and forth between parents or whatever, or they lose one parent completely, or whatever. Well, in the 18th century, in many colonies, you had to have an act of the legislature to get divorced. Basically, it was a very difficult, you know, process or whatever.
Right.
And I think Christian nations would probably put more of a burden on people to observe God's version of solving some of these problems. You know, I definitely think, and I don't think you even have to be a Christian to agree with this, but I think a lot of people would like to see the death penalty more consistently enforced, you know, because they're tired of seeing the random violence that's never addressed, you know. And I even say to, you know, agnostics, I say, okay, you want to be a happy agnostic, you want to cheat on your wife, you want to, you're nervous by all sorts of Christian standards, whatever. I can guarantee you would have more freedom in a Christian nationalist government than you would have in a secular nationalist government, or certainly an Islamic national government. I mean, so there'd be more peace on the streets. The streets would be cleaner. Criminals would be put away, and, you know, even the atheists and agnostics would benefit by that standard. But anyway, does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it, I guess I would ask. So then, how would that look on the grand stage in terms of with other countries? Because, you know, with you know, a lot of what Trump ran on in 2016 was taken from, I believe it was Yoram Hazani, who originally you know, was in charge of Israel. He was, I believe, was the prime minister. But either way, a lot of his governing, a lot of his leadership was modeled in Trump's 2016 when he ran. I did a speech at my university.
I'm missing the name of the other political figure that you're talking about.
Hazani, Yoram Hazani. That was where Benjamin Netanyahu came up under. And it was nationalism over there. So essentially, how would your view of Christian nationalism look on the grand stage for foreign countries and things like that? Would we be focusing on things such as Iran, things like that, or would we be focusing more in-house?
We'd probably have a lot of just war conversations, since that's the ultimate expression of, you know, foreign policy. Is it? And there's a lot of debate about that. You know, what do you do? How do you handle just war in a nuclear age or whatever? I mean, you know. So I'm not saying that there's any clean, obvious solutions, you know, right away. But I just think being bold enough to say, in this debate, we're going to introduce some ancient and proven concepts, you know, that are divinely inspired. and we're not going to be ashamed of that anymore. You know, we're tired of people trying to blur the line between male and female. You know, that there's a reason why God, you know, makes these commands or whatever, you know. And you're introducing, I mean, the stories about some of these kids who've transitioned and the misery that comes about. I mean, they're not. It's not happy, and it's at some point I think you have to turn to people who have a floating truth meter. Look, you know, we're just not going to go with your ideas. They don't work, you know.
Right.
So, but in terms of, I'm not sure if you're getting at foreign policy, you know, how we deal with non-Christian states, or.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, you know, nationalism, just on the surface level, you're focusing in-house. You're focusing on everything, you know, we're about our nation first. That's essentially where the America First comes from. It was mentioned under Reagan, but Trump adopted that idea. And that's where I meant it connected with, you know, with Israel many years ago.
Well, I don't speak for all the other voices, you know, on this front or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
But what, I'm kind of an imperialist, basically. I would say that, you know, the old story about the British general who was in India in the 19th century, and they were having a funeral pyre for Indian official, and someone else said, you know, what are they doing with the man's wife? And they said they're about to throw her on the funeral pyre, you know, after her husband, you know. And because we have this tradition of the wife dies with the husband, you know. And the British general said, well, we have a tradition in Britain too. Anyone who proposes that or tries that gets a rope around their neck and they're hanged. You know what I mean? Like, you know,
Wow.
that you know, I think you have to be free to state, and that some cultures are more effective at some things. You know, that they're more productive. For example, Jews constitute something like 0.2% of the world's population, but they have 15 to 20% of the world's wealth. You know, and so you have to say to yourself that, okay, maybe it's a divine proof that God truly did bless those people, or maybe there's some cultural realities about how they operate, their values,
Right.
that end up creating wealth. Okay, in Japan, I mean, utterly clean transportation systems. You know, there are certain values they have. You know, family shame and so forth, whatever. And so I'm not saying it's all necessarily Western imperialism, but you're going to have a discussion at some point as to what makes Somalia and what makes Arizona. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Would you rather live in Phoenix, you know, or I'm not sure what the capital of Somalia is, you know, but I mean, I'm going to take Phoenix, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's a cultural reason for that if, for example, you move into a Reformed Protestant neighborhood, and the worst thing you could do is steal from your neighbor, okay?
Yeah.
You're going to have more wealth, you know, because people aren't going to have to spend all their time protecting their assets, you know, and paying for security, and you know, and so I'm kind of an imperialist in the sense that I believe the missionaries go in and they preach, you know, nothing like forced conversion or whatever, but the soldiers go in at the same time to keep the peace, basically. So that you look at the Spanish conquest or whatever, is that Catholics may have gotten a lot of things wrong, you know, but they're no longer sacrificing victims to the sun god on top of the temples anymore. I mean, with you know, blood candy for kids or whatever, you know, they you know, they basically said no, you know, that's not happening anymore, you know, and it always stuns me that people who would never last, you know, in pre-Columbian Aztec Mexico, they'd be dead, you know,
Yeah.
somehow thinking it was this pristine culture that just got raped or whatever. No, it's like they wouldn't want to live there anymore, you know.
Right.
I mean, so when I talk about ideas like Christian nationalism and Christian imperialism, it's because I think Christianity is a better idea, that it produces better culture. Does it make any sense?
Yeah. No, that makes a great deal of sense. So thank you for clarifying that. You know, I guess, you know, with the Iran war, and given your views, do you believe that he's handling this the right way, or what would you do different?
I don't know. I've asked Navy guys why the Straits of Hormuz can't be secured, and apparently there's a lot of drone warfare that is very hard to defend against. So I know that there's some what's the word, strategic or tactical stuff that are, yes, advances we haven't solved yet. So
Yeah.
But I don't think that you can look at Iran's history, 47 years of not death to America from people on the street, but supreme leaders promising over and over again death to America. At some point, you have to do something about that. You know, I think if we've decimated their navy, if we've reduced their ability to fire missiles, you know, maybe it's just, you know, a mop up every 3 years or something with as few troops on the ground. But I don't, and I made this point with Iraq and everything else, is that I don't know why we go in there, okay? I don't know why we put anybody on the ground unless we tell American soldiers, we have a new Homestead Act, you get land, you know, you're in this conquered territory, and we're sitting in the new government. We'll have to guarantee rights of freedom of religion for Jews, Christians, and Muslims, you know, and with no excuses, you know. So, because I think, I'm not sure what it was about the end of the Soviet Union, but suddenly the whole Islamic world united on this need for Sharia law, you know.
Yeah.
And I respect the voices that are against that, you know. I don't think that Britain has any leadership on this front, so.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of views that I believe is dividing the Republican Party that's making it more fractured now, because you've got this tear where I believe, let's just say, half of the right say this is absolutely in America's best interest to go in there and annihilate, you know.
And you can't win either. So I got in an argument with a Zionist. I said, look,
you said with a
Zionist, you know,
Zionist,
I said, look, America may have its own interest in this war, okay, regardless of whether it's good for Israel or not.
Yeah.
And just because I use the word regardless of whether it's good for Israel or not, I was called an anti-Semite. You know, it's like, and I said, man, some of these evangelicals, it's just clear that they think that their salvation is tied up in how much they agree with the modern state of Israel. You know, not blessing Abraham, but anything Israel decides to do it's like.
Yeah.
I was on Huckabee's show once. I have a lot of respect for Mike Huckabee, but when he went out of his way to get Pollard, you know, early release, and Pollard, he revealed enormous number of classified secrets to Israel, and then got transferred to the Soviet Union and jeopardized American lives, basically. You know?
Wow.
And so I said, Mike, I mean, God's still going to love you if you don't help. So I mean, Israeli spies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, particularly when they're damaging us. You know. So, but and I always tell people, if I had to live in the Middle East, I'd probably live in Israel. It's probably the most civilized nation there. But but I don't think we don't have to do everything Israel wants us to do. But we can't be afraid to do things that are in our interests, just because someone will accuse us of being pro-Israel or whatever. I mean, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, in my own view, and I don't know what your view is, I'm kind of putting it together in my head, but, you know, in my own view, with how far right those evangelicals go, you know, and I'm a Christian, but they tend to, they're edging right on the side of idolatry insofar as everything that Israel does, we need to be in line, and we follow Israel with whatever they do, and that is right on the verge of idolatry, because you're not focusing on, you know, essentially the Bible. You're focusing based on what Netanyahu and they're leading their country in. So you're following that one person versus God.
Yeah.
You know, and I get a little worried with that because, you know, I like Mike Huckabee. I also watched his interview with Tucker, and, you know, not that everything that Tucker says is right, but in that interview, there was a moment in there where Huckabee was leaning on whatever the state of Israel wants is the way we're going to go.
Right.
And that worried me.
Yeah. Well, and, you know, it's from a failure of making distinctions that you can bless Abraham and his seed. You know, you can wish love and success on the Jewish people like we would on all people.
Yeah.
You know? But if you don't remember that there's neither Greek nor Jew in Christ, you know, that the Christian message is the most unifying message in world history.
Yeah.
And if you start divvying that up, either whether it's Zionist, non-Zionist, you know, woke, not woke, you know, black, not white. I mean, some of these messages that some of these evangelical pastors give to white Christian congregations about their debt to the black church, well, this is a divisive piece of nonsense. You know,
Yeah.
You're inviting people to disremember that they're brothers and sisters. You know, that their skin color is immaterial. You know,
Right.
And also, it ignores the theological principle is that even in the Old Testament, the children of Abraham were the ones who were circumcised of heart, not the genetic ones. I mean, in other words, that you could be a genetic child of Abraham and be circumcised of heart, and you were considered a Jew, you know. But you're not a Jew if you're not circumcised of heart. And Paul says this, you know, you are a Jew who are Jew inwardly, you know, which he's talking about Gentiles, you know.
Yeah.
So I think it really is terribly divisive, and idolatry is a good way to describe it, because I really get the sense some guys like Cruz and Huckabee, they really think they have to bow before the throne of the modern state of Israel. You know? And it is discouraging, you know.
You know, I noticed you have a Save the Farm tab on your website. You know, what's going on with that?
Well, about in 2018, there was a cancel culture war against us that took a big chunk of a lot of districts away from us, you know, because of my First Amendment expression. And we began a federal case that's still, it's going back to the Ninth Circuit for the third time in a couple days. So that's been a very expensive lawsuit. A lot of law firms have put in free time, but we've had to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars, you know. And so then right after that, COVID came along, and COVID just created paralysis in the field trip, you know, industry, because it just shut it down.
Yeah.
And we went into an enormous amount of debt just to stay in the business. So we're trying to get some of that short-term debt paid down and become more profitable. So we're a for-profit business. We're not a non-profit, you know, and so people can't deduct gifts to us, but they still give us. I think last year we had about $60,000 in gifts from our customers, you know, because they want us to be around.
Yeah.
And the other factor is that it's just extraordinarily expensive to do business in California now. I mean, everything, workers' comp is high, general liability is high.
Yeah.
We have to pay $50,000 a year just to keep our land for property taxes, you know. So literally everyone who walks on the farm, I gotta figure out how to get, you know, at least, you know, $4 or $5 worth of overhead out of them just to be here, basically, you know. That's not, you know, everything else that goes into providing the product, and then also, what we have a spiritual question for California is that, do you want a place like this here? You know what I mean? Is this, are we performing a service for the Christian community? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And for conservatives, you know. And if we are, then we need help, you know. So
Yeah.
we're kind of narrowing in on a law firm that specializes in crowdfunding, and so it's gotten, raising capital is a lot easier than it was about 15 years ago, you know. So
Wow.
We may do a crowdfunding campaign or something like that. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's not really much of anything like this in this area, especially in California, because, you know, in SoCal we have, you know, amusement parks and things like that, but that's very much like money. It's very, you know, you go to Disneyland and it's, you're spending hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars just to walk in the door.
I don't know if you saw the video either, but a few years ago, there's a little village court in Disneyland where they sell all the Disney princess dresses for little girls. Okay. So it's a big retail hit at Disneyland. Anyway, out in the courtyard is a dude, you know, with a mustache, dressed as a fairy godmother. You know? And you can just see these little girls bewildered by this, you know, obvious cis man, you know, dressed up as the fairy godmother. And I thought, you know, I would like to be the antidote for that kind of nonsense. You know, that the stories we tell should be heroic. They should be redemptive. You know, and not larded with the issue du jour. You know, I mean, I mean, it's partly my fault for not coming up with something that people need to see, you know, but I always tell the staff it's kind of the Sound of Music feeling. You know, every program we do, you should leave having that climb every mountain kind of, you know, feeling or whatever. So, but we'll see, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think that a lot of people tend to do the, you know, okay, boomer and that kind of thing, and it's, you know, I think that the era of the children being outside and playing, I mean, my generation was right at the tail end. I was born in 94, you know, so I'm 31 now. You know, my generation still would build a clubhouse or go outside and play basketball and things like that, but right after that, it changed. You know, technology took over. You know, when you go to these amusement parks, it's not all nuts and bolts. It's a lot of screens and virtual reality things. When you come here, these children outside, they're touching grass. They're, you know, I saw a sign for archery and, you know, all these different things. That's, to me, is something I think these kids are craving in the back of their mind. They just, you know, subconsciously, I think that's what they crave.
It's kind of, I mean, we try to do, you know, archery and tomahawks and blacksmithing and stuff like that, but it's interesting. You watch a kid running around. Sometimes they just want to explore. You know, they just want to see what the country looks like. You know, so we'll probably go to some sort of admission model. So, but we have to build, you know, admission booths and stuff like that. You know, but
so you would actually want to do something like that?
I'm going to have to, because we give a lot of the farm away with the free admissions. You know. Most of these kids they're all part of schools paying for field trips, but on fall Saturdays, those tend to be profitable. But most people get into the farm for free. They don't pay anything to walk in. So so we have to figure that one out. So I guess it, like, you know, one of the last questions I would ask is, what would it take for, you know, for this to go away? I mean, this is something that is a, you know, for us to give up.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, financial disaster would be a natural first wave kind of thing if that happened. You know, if we suddenly, like for example, if Newsom drove gasoline up to $12 a gallon or something like that, and
we're close.
Or, you know, there's major economic catastrophe, that would be it. But I'm trying not to think of it just from the point of crisis. I'd like to get a team of people together to help visualize what the farm could be. And we're thinking about, you know, eventually something like 50 or 60 cottages, you know, all over the hills, basically re-landscaped hills where you plant eastern style forests, you know, oak and maple and poplar, that sort of thing, and then have a conference center and basically education vacations, basically. So
Yeah.
people could recharge their batteries and learn something about America. So that would be my ideal, So
And I like that you're rooting it in American culture and history. You're rooting this in American culture and history. I love that.
Yeah. So that'd be our goal, and we'll just have to see whether we get such great customers, but I just don't know what percentage of California they represent. Or how to get more of them. And I think what you're saying about screens is interesting because I'm getting the feeling that adults too, there's just so much entertainment, on these things. That I think they're a lot more virtual than they used to be, And and it takes, our dinners cost $70, and you have to get dressed up and drive to the hills, and people have to be pretty gung-ho to come here, So
yeah. Well, I absolutely appreciate your time, and I thank you very much for allowing us to come up here and see this awesome farm. I definitely want to explore a little bit.
Feel free to take some pictures. So
I so appreciate you. Thank you so much, Jim. I appreciate it.
All righty.